Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 5. And I wanted us to do something a little bit different. First chapter that we talk about is actually about technology. So I wanted to kind of utilize technology in a way that can help us to explore this topic, but then also, as a resource that we can utilize to moving forward. So basically, this is an interactive career counseling overview for chapters 13, 14, 15. What we can do is just go ahead and hop into the first topic. So basically, this just kind of gives us a little bit of information in terms of like things that we can explore and look into a little bit deeper. So for chapter 13, we're talking about technology and information resources. So definitely being aware of what those career tools are that you can utilize when it comes to technology. So knowing about, ONET, Career One Stop, BLS, these are all great tools when you are working as a career counselor. Also, we can't forget about the ethical and practical considerations that can come in as well too, right? So digital literacy is something that we have to think about when we work with clients. Not all of our clients are able to utilize the same resources that we are able to. And so just really figuring out ways of making sure that we are aligning it with their skill set, but then also if there's, areas that we can support them and help them in, we want to make sure that we do that as well too. Some other things that we have to consider are some of the equity issues, right? So, not everybody has access to fast internet. Not everybody has access to a laptop. I know for myself, I work with clients that are just as involved. And so, a lot of times, they might not have access to an actual laptop or, a computer that they are able to utilize in a specific way that can help them with employment depending on what type of employment they're going for. So we have to always think about those things whenever it comes to making sure that we are practicing ethically. And then, of course, best practices. So knowing what tools to utilize and how do we individualize that for our clients. So the counselor does play a huge role in this. We want to make sure that we are knowing what those ethical standards are, understanding how we are trying to make sure that things are more equitable as we work with clients, and really knowing, okay, how do I practice in an ethical way, right? So knowing, okay, what are the limitations to confidentiality? What are some of the things that we have to consider when it comes to working with a person virtually, things like that. All right, so we're going to go back to chapter 14. And so this chapter was all about K through 12 career development. So looking at, people that are technically most likely going to be minors, right? So we want to know, how does that development start? So, K through 5 is when people start to become aware of careers, right? I know my kiddo, when he graduated from pre-K, they had this whole conversation about like, what do I want to be when I grow up, right? And the same thing happens even in kindergarten during his kindergarten graduation, right? So there's this self-awareness where they start to think about like, okay, what are things that I could do? A lot of times it's going to be, based off of family. Middle school, so grade 6 through 8, that's when they start to really explore some of their interests, right? So this is usually around the time when kids start to get into different extracurricular activities, right? And that's going to be some of the ways that they start to explore their interests and also explore like what are some options for them. And then they will start that academic planning at this stage too, right? So they're now starting to take classes that aren't just, the general classes. Now they're taking classes that are going to be more so aligned with what they feel like they're doing well in and what they are passionate about. So once they get in high school, of course, that's going to even up the ante even more, right? So that's when they start to really start planning. They start to think about internships. They start to think about, doing volunteer work. So there's a lot of things that happen. They start to think about college and things like that. And, of course, there's several different pathways that kids can go into college. They can go into attending a trade school. They can also think about going straight into employment. So they start to make these decisions at that stage. And so we want to make sure that, we are creating those individualized plans as students are progressing and things like that. So this is something that's really huge, especially for anyone that might be interested in like school counseling, things like that, because this is going to be a part of the conversations that are taking place, because essentially a huge piece of it, especially in high school, is really preparing and moving forward and creating that plan. And we have to be culturally responsive as we're doing this too, right? Because we have to realize that we have to honor families because they are minors, most of them for that matter, and really trying to make sure that we are taking on a culturally sensitive, utilizing cultural humility as we're doing this when we're working with students. All right, so we're going to go back to the overview. Last but not least, we have chapter 15. So, chapter 15 is where we start to dive into some things that are a little bit different, right? So, now we're talking about college and we're talking about, career readiness. We're talking about career and technical education, right? And so, this is where we start to combine the technical things as well as academic things and really figuring out ways of having that real world application. And so, we'll notice that certain things are going to happen at this stage, right? So dual preparation. So students might be both in college, but also entering into the career force. Also, we start to think about like those career clusters. And so really figuring out ways to help people to understand pathways when it comes into going into different careers. And we have to also think that there are elements in aspects to this, right? So, college preparation, there's coursework, there's these certain standards. It's a lot more based off of the academics. But also we have the career technical education where it's like, okay, this is where I'm learning the specific skill. I'm getting a certification in this area. A lot of times when we think about college, we think about there are classes that we have to take just because those are some of the prerequisites that we have to do just to get a degree from a college. Whereas the career technical education is very much industry based. And so they're able to focus mostly on just what they need in order to get into that industry. Work based learning is also a great option too, right? So that's those internships, those apprenticeships, having those real life experiences where you get into the job and you start working through the job. And of course, as we are thinking about, the options of higher education, career technical education, we have to think about how do we support students because there are going to be both academic and personal needs, especially when we think about being on different campuses, right? Whether it's a technical school or, a community college or four-year college. And so again, having equitable practices is going to be important here too. So really knowing how do we do that for the students to make sure that they are having the access to the different things. And last but not least, also thinking about those clusters, right? So thinking about like how do people fall into different categories when it comes to understanding, different careers and what cluster does it fall into. So this was just a really quick overview. Again, this is like a resource that was put together very quickly. You'll notice that I utilized Claude AI in order to create this, but I'm going to share that link with everybody so that you guys can kind of explore it. But think about these type of things when you are thinking about going into career counseling, right? Of like, how do I utilize different technologies and how do I do it in an ethical way where I'm considering the needs of my clients as I'm doing so. So I will definitely share this link with everybody. And hopefully, this was a helpful tool. I will also be doing that quick overview quiz. So I think I'm going to do it Quizlet again this week. But please let me know if you guys prefer a different method. All right. I hope you guys have a good day.